Misogyny and Monotheism. Among the best-known relics of this Middle Assyrian era are lists of laws and palace decrees recovered during the extensive excavations of the Assyrian capital, Ashur city, now called Kallat Shergat, conducted by the Deutsche Orientgesellschaft between 1903 and the outbreak of European war in 1914. A number of legal tablets were found, dating from Tiglath-Pileser's time, though only 3 of the documents, labelled A, B, and C, were in good enough condition to be deciphered and read. Tablets A and B deal with crime and punishment, property, and debt. The most immediately striking aspects of these laws are how harsh and cruel they seem compared even to Hammurabi's eye for an eye code, and how deep is the misogyny that they express. Punishments include severe beatings, horrific mutilations, and ghastly methods of capital punishment, flaying alive or impalement on a stake, for instance, the original model for Roman crucifixions. This is prescribed as the punishment for a woman who procures an abortion. If a woman has procured a miscarriage by her own act, when they have prosecuted her and convicted her, they shall impale her on stakes without burying her. If she died in having the miscarriage, they shall impale her on stakes without burying her. For damaging a man's fertility, the penalty is mutilation. If a woman has crushed a gentleman's testicle in a brawl, they shall cut off 1 finger of hers. If the other testicle has become affected along with it by catching the infection, even though a physician has bound it up, or she has crushed the other testicle in the brawl, they shall tear out both her eyes. Adultery is either a capital offence or punishable by disfiguration. If a gentleman has caught another gentleman with his wife, when they have prosecuted and convicted him, they shall put both of them to death. But if he cuts off his wife's nose, he shall make the gentleman into a eunuch, and they shall mutilate his whole face. It must be admitted that we do not know to what extent such penalties were actually imposed in practice. Assyrian rulers energetically promoted their reputation for using appalling savagery. The historian Albert Olmsted called it calculated frightfulness, as a tool of governance and a weapon of psychological warfare. An inscription of Tiglath-Pileser, comparing the king to a hunter who set out before the sun rose and marched 3 days' distance before dawn, proudly claims that he cut open the wombs of the pregnant, he blinded infants. Gruesome actions indeed, but closely matching those foretold to the Aramean king Hazael by the prophet Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 11. Their strongholds wilt thou set on fire, and their young men wilt thou slay with the sword, and wilt dash their children, and rip up their women with child. So it is just possible that revelling in the barbarity visited upon women and children was a familiar literary trope rather than a truthful account of real events. After all, similar atrocity stories were told by both Entente and Central Powers during World War I, although this time intended to attract blame rather than praise. The savage provisions described in the Middle Assyrian laws may have been intended more as a deterrent than as the glorification of cruelty. However, even if the draconian punishments were theory rather than practice, their anti-female tone cannot be denied. Men could freely divorce their wives and turn them out of the house with nothing. Wives had no right to divorce. Women were liable for their husbands' debts and were punished for their husbands' crimes. Husbands had no responsibility for their wives' law-breaking. While no ancient society we know of could be truthfully described as a feminist paradise, Middle Assyrian regulations went far further in their oppression of women than any before. It is Volk, ein Führer. However, though there may have been only one realm and only one leader, the infamous division of Hitler's subjects into Arier and Untermenschen, Aryans and subhumans, would have been seen by Assyrians as a criminal betrayal. As the texts demonstrate, all Assyrians, whether foreign deportees or of native ancestry, like the Kenate Shani Nua Labiruti, the old-time families of Nineveh, were regarded as equal. Newcomers were carefully instructed in their duties. People of the 4 ends of the world, of alien languages, diverse speech, inhabitants of mountainous regions and of the plains, at the order of Ashur my lord, I made them as of one tongue and settled therein. I commissioned natives of Assyria, masters of every craft, as overseers and commanders, to teach them proper conduct, and to revere God and King. That this policy was successful is attested to by the foreign names that even high state officials bore. Girisapunu, governor of Rasapa, must have been a Phoenician, as was the famous Ahikar, keeper of the king's signet and counsellor of all Assyria, under Esarhaddon. His story would become a classic of Syriac, Arabic, Ethiopic, Armenian, Turkish, and Slavonic literature. Provincial and district governors, Gulusu, Arbaya, and Adad Suri, bore Aramean names. So did Hanunu, commander of the eunuch's guard, Salamanu, commander of the Queen Mother's guard, and Abdi Ili from Ashkelon, third man on the chariot of the chief eunuch. Kuya, Hilkiah, Giriyah, and Yasuri, officials residing in fortresses, are shown by their names to have been Israelite worshippers of the Hebrew God. However, this policy of inclusion and equality for all was to have profound consequences. New Assyrians, Aramaic speakers, soon came to greatly outnumber the old. Thus it was not very long before users of Assyria's original Akkadian dialect were reduced to a minority in their own land. Of course, scholars and academics adhered tenaciously to their traditions, yet they could not stop the slow but inexorable progress of the new language, which became first an alternative official tongue and finally the main chancellery medium of the empire. So did imperial policy and high principle ensure that Aramaic would bring 2,000 years of civilization built on the Sumerian and Akkadian languages to an end, and yet, paradoxically, at the same time, it would also assure its immortality.